Welcome to the Datacolor 2014 webinar series. Today our co-sponsor is Hunt's Photo and Video. If you aren't familiar with Hunt's, then you should definitely go to their website and check them out. If you are familiar with Hunt's, then you should stick around for the specials on Datacolor products being offered through Hunt's at the end of this webinar. So today our presenter is, as usual, David Saffir. And David is putting together a general digital workflow process webinar here for the capture end of things, which is, I mean, most of us know about calibrating our monitors. And those of us that do much printing know about profiling our printers. But this is the capture end, both mostly for photo and maybe a little preview for video. So those are the areas which I find the fewest photographers actually doing anything about. And so my takeaway on this is if you decide to do one thing about your capture color workflow from this webinar, then I'll consider that a great success. And the one simplest thing you could do would be to use a spider cube. I think David will probably come to the same conclusion in his presentation. So let me introduce David. He's a professional photographer and photo educator living in Southern California. His house hasn't burned down yet, though apparently they lost one in the family.
It was a house that my stepmother used to own, thank goodness, but yeah.
Well, so you used to own it now, no matter what. So
yeah, that's for sure.
So I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope things are going well in your end of Southern California. Apparently the fires are mostly to the south these days. And I hope that you'll be able to focus on the webinar today and not be too distracted by the local issues.
Oh, me too. If I leave suddenly, you'll know why, right? So, hello everybody. This is David Saffir. We did a webinar not too different than this a year ago for Hunt's. We've made some improvements and changes. There is some new material here. So if you've dropped in to see if this is the same, there's probably about 40% of it that's the same, and the rest I think you'll find is material that's either couched in a new way or is actually new information. As David said, I'm a photographer. I live in Southern California. I do commercial high-tech photography as part of my studio practice, and my personal work pretty much involves landscapes, scenics, wildlife, that sort of thing. I've always found that the capture part of things, getting things right in the camera, is the key to success in terms of setting the stage for everything that happens afterward, keeping post-production activities under control, et cetera, et cetera. And just to give you an example, maybe a little bit outside the color field, it's generally accepted that if you're making an exposure in digital and you're off by more than 10%, you're going to have a substandard exposure, and you're also going to have an issue with color. And I think that it's important to understand that in the world of digital, it's even more sensitive than it was in the world of transparency, and it's important to get it right in the camera, get your exposure right, get the high end of things correct, get the shadow end of things correctly, get your midtones in the right place, and get your color right the first time so that you don't have to deal with it in post-production. You'll get a better result every time, I guarantee it.
So before we start on this, David, let me make one more announcement here, and that is you should all have a GoToWebinar control panel, which may be hidden by the GoToWebinar viewer at the moment. If you'll go find that control panel, you'll find on it that there is a section called Questions, and if you open up that Questions section, you can type in questions. Now, David's going to be pretty busy speaking today, so I'm going to try to answer questions from this webinar as they come up in the question and answer section. If they come up enough times, then we may bring them into the audio portion of the webinar instead of just answering them in the Q&A. So far, the questions I see have to do with lack of audio, which is always something of a problem with GoToWebinar. There'll always be one or two or three people who are having trouble with audio. This is not originating at our end. It has something to do with bandwidth or process, and there's nothing we can do about that except that hope you can get it to work at some point during the webinar. If not, we understand why you leave, because the pictures may be pretty, but they're not enough on their own. So I'm going to turn it back over to David and encourage you to put your questions into the question section of the control panel if you have any. Thanks.
I'll just add one little thing to what David had said, is that occasionally the audio will be interrupted for 4 or 5 seconds, so don't give up on us too fast. That's typically a bandwidth issue. It can occur anywhere along the chain, and it does happen probably once a session, where the audio will fade away and come right back. So please be patient. Going back to the webinar, the big picture, I like to start with sort of a view from 10,000 feet. A definition of color management is the ability to efficiently produce consistent, predictable, and repeatable color across a range of devices. So that includes your camera, that includes your display, that might include an on-camera monitor for video. Really, any device that you're working with in the chain of production for photography and videography is included in color management. And a calibrated workflow, a controlled workflow, is always more efficient and predictable. Yes, it takes a little bit of training and a little bit of effort, but in the end, it's going to save you money, time, and space. So in terms of getting it right in the camera, what are we talking about? Well, you're talking about exposure and controlling dynamic range, white balance. Sometimes one would create a camera profile or preset. Some of the other things in these examples might include managing your display. Most displays come out of the box, they're completely wrong. There's very few displays that come out of the box that are calibrated, even nowadays. You want to be doing color accurate image editing. You don't want to be going down the wrong road with your color or your image editing and find out when you get to the end that your print just looks awful, or your on-screen display looks awful, or your slideshow looks terrible. And it's all about efficiency, cost, and above all, quality. Now, most high-end DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, their variants, even the ones that provide video capture, provide excellent capture quality. It's interesting to note that each camera and lens has its own color signature, and that's a combination of the lens elements, the glass, and the physics of that particular optical device, and the performance of the sensor, how big it is, what kind it is, and the circuitry that's behind it that's helping to interpret the incoming visual signal and record it to your memory card or go over the wire to your computer. There are things that you can do to enhance exposure performance. Some of those might include in-camera versus custom white balance, and we'll talk about that in a little while, and camera calibration, which does give a bump in color performance. Okay. Now, one of the devices that the Datacolor has that's extremely useful, it's inexpensive, it's small, is the Spider Cube. And if you think of it as a 3D gray card, you'd be half right. It's much more than that. It's versatile and durable. It's an advanced polymer. It's almost impossible to break. It has a threaded mount on the bottom. We use it for exposure management, in-camera white balance, and also in post-production for color or gray balance. We can use it to help us work the dynamic range as part of working in the zone system. And in fact, I should remind you that on the Datacolor blog, we have several articles on the Spider Cube. It's at spider.datacolor.com. And one of them deals with the zone system in the Spider Cube. So you might find that to be very, very interesting. It's useful for handheld and tethered shooting and in post-production, in studio and location work. And like I said before, it's much more than a gray card. Now, moving along, this is one of my colleagues, and we've got an interesting way of using the Spider Cube in landscape photography. We have a extension device, and the Spider Cube right down here at the bottom where my cursor arrow is pointing has a threaded mount, so you can put it on, I believe it's a 1/4-inch mount, and you can aim the camera at it, and the photograph that you're going to see is like this on the right. Okay, and you can use that in a number of ways, which I'm going to get to shortly, but it's a very, very versatile, very simple device, easy to carry around, inexpensive, and does a number of things for you. So let's talk a little bit about that. The basis of this is that the LCD, the first level of this is that the LCD on your digital camera, your DSLR, is not showing you a raw file. showing you a JPEG, and the camera generates the JPEG from the raw file it's recorded. So that JPEG is compressed. It's got very much less information in it than the raw file does, and in fact your histogram that you see is based on that JPEG as well. Now let's talk a little bit about using the spider cube. If you take a photograph of the spider cube and you have the white clipping view of the blinkies enabled on your screen, on your preview screen, these white areas, if they are overexposed, are going to blink. So they're going to tell you if your camera is overexposing the scene. Down below, you're going to see that there's a black card area and a black trap or a black circle. If you can't see the black circle, you're underexposed. So right now, you know where your shot is bracketed in terms of exposure. Also take note that there's a ball on the top for your specular highlights. That will always be blinking if the blinkies are enabled or the white clipping view is enabled, but the white panel should not be blinking if you don't want to overexpose your shot. Now you can also use manual exposure to fine-tune this. Let's say you've got this on aperture priority. You can use the plus or minus exposure compensation buttons on your Canon or Nikon or other camera. Excuse me one second. Just a sip of water. Or you can switch to manual exposure and fine-tune your exposure to get the correct kind of image that you want to see. Now, of course, this is neither a replacement for or a substitute for the histogram. It's a supplement to. And so it can help you set the exposure very quickly in your camera with just a couple of looks. And of course, once you have that photograph of the spider cube in your lighting condition, you can save that for later for use in post-production. And I will get to that shortly in just a moment. Sorry about that. So here we have a commercial photograph that I took, and you can see right away the difference between the two of these is the one on the left has got quite the blue color cast. Look at the white areas here and here, and that's mostly because of the lighting situation in the room, the paint job on the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And we have a spider cube in view, and then we have a second photograph, same photograph, where I have used the gray area on the spider cube to set color balance, and it's greatly improved. So it's really if you want it to be a one-click color correction, and you're off and running. So this job didn't take me a week to get the color right. It took me a day to get all the shots, in the ballpark. Another way to look at this is Capture One Pro, but it really works the same way in Adobe Camera Raw or in Lightroom, for example. Is you take the white eyedropper, you go to the brighter side of the spider cube because that's where your primary light source is. You want to correct to the primary light source, and you click on it. Now, in applications like this, you can set this up so that every shot subsequent to this and this taken in this lighting condition, let's say you're working in the studios or you've got controlled lighting even outdoors, every shot taken subsequent to this will be balanced to that gray point on that spider cube. So from that point forward, whatever previews you see on the screen, let's say you're working with this application and you're seeing those previews come up, they are going to be color corrected to that gray point. So shooting tethered, you're going to see the actual color, et cetera, that you should be. In Photoshop, in say the curves panel, you can use the white, black, and gray eyedropper. So you can see down here I've got arrows pointing to the spider cube, and you can expand your use of the spider cube. So I would typically start with the black and white panels on the spider cube. I would set my white and black points and then set the gray point. If you set the gray point first, it will tend to shift when you go over to the black and the white areas. So do the gray point last, and you should get a very, very good result. Sometimes it's necessary, the black may be just a little bit too, the pure black and the pure white may be just a little bit too contrasty. You have the option here of setting the values on the eyedroppers if you want to have some flexibility, say for print. Typically, you don't want a white point. The normal white point is 255. If you double click on this white eyedropper, this panel will come up, and you can see that here the RGB values for that white dropper, they will normally be 255 in each panel. You can dial it down a little bit to 255, 245 in each panel, and get a white point that's slightly below paper white. That will give you a little bit more detail and highlights, for example, this mask or the gloves or this rack for the discs and this semiconductor oven would show up with a little bit more detail. I doubt you can see any detail over the internet, but I think you get the idea. Now you can also use the spider cube. You can fill the frame, and you can actually do a custom white balance in your camera. And I'm sure that some of you are already asking, why would I want to do a custom white balance in a camera? Here's the deal. If you set the camera, and I never recommend this, if you set the camera on auto white balance, even if you're shooting raw, every photograph is going to have a slightly different white balance to it, which means in the post-production cycle, you're going to wind up having to do some kind of color correction to every photograph on an individual basis. The next best thing is to use the presets on the back of the camera for white balance. So if you're in an incandescent lighting environment or you're in a cloudy lighting environment, you can set the button to record at that color temperature or that color level. The problem is that there's gaps in between. I mean, you can see here, direct sunlight to cloudy, 800K difference. That's significant. How do you fill that gap in? Well, the fact is that if you're using these buttons, you can't. You can either have a color meter and choose the exact color temperature and choose it from a list of values. Most people neither own one of those nor want to because they're in the $1,500 range. It's much easier to take the spider cube, fill the frame, it doesn't have to be in focus, and hit the custom white balance button on the camera and do a white balance in camera for that lighting condition. That will give you that exact color temperature that's lacking from this list. So I hope you're beginning to see that the spider cube is a really, really versatile tool, that it can serve a number of purposes. It can be a quick and clean way to get yourself in the neighborhood in post-production. It can also be a quick and clean way to get your custom white balance going in your camera before you start shooting and make everything else downstream much easier. Now let's just take a look at this. Now there's a question here I think that's important. When I calibrate my camera with a lens under certain light conditions, must I recalibrate under different light conditions? If you're using the spider cube and you're setting an in-camera white balance or a custom white balance, I would say the answer is yes. So let's say you're indoors. I'll make up a story. You're shooting a wedding. You're indoors with all the artificial lighting in a conference venue or a church or a reception hall, and then you go outside to take pictures in the garden. I would definitely reshoot the spider cube and reset the white balance in the camera. You'll be much better off doing that. As far as camera calibration goes, that's a different story. We'll get to that shortly. David, any comments on that particular question?
Well, what was the question again? Because I'm busy typing on the next one.
Okay, the question was, when I calibrate my camera with a lens under certain light conditions, must I recalibrate under different light conditions with the same lens and camera? And he's referring to spider cube.
Yeah, you must re-white balance and re-exposure balance under different conditions. That's the cube is the portable tool, the one you should use under each different lighting condition to save yourself time and get better results when you're doing post-process. You don't have to recalibrate your camera necessarily in terms of the color profile of the camera.
Oh, we just lost your sound. Okay. I don't know if anybody else can hear me. Patty, can you hear me?
Yes, David, you're good. You could keep going.
We're back. We lost sound for a while. Can anyone hear me? Well, I'm going to continue as though, let's just see here. Okay, everybody says they can hear me. All right, sorry about the delay. We did lose David, so I was a little bit concerned. Let's go on to the Spider Checker, which is a really useful color management tool in Fielder Studio. It's made with a rigid clamshell. It's got large pigment-based color patches. They're replaceable. This can be mounted on a tripod. It can be used for camera calibration with a software standalone product that we make, and it can be used in Lightroom, Photoshop, and Hasselblad Focus. The right side has 24 patches that are near or within the sRGB color space, plus a 10% gray ramp. We also have 6 additional skin tones, 6 medium saturated colors, and the software generates a robust and tunable custom camera calibration. So this is the creme de la creme of calibration devices as far as your camera goes. The software is easy to use. The device is easy to set up. It's pretty typically what one does is you set the device up parallel to the camera in good light. The lighting has to be even corner to corner and top to bottom. You take a photograph of it in RAW. You don't have to convert the file later to a DNG like you would do with some other technology. You take a picture of the color panels in RAW, and then you import it into the software application. You crop and align it, and you process and export a preset. That's pretty much, I'm not exaggerating, that's pretty much as simple as it gets. And you apply the preset in Photoshop, Lightroom, Focus, etc., and it will do what's called a characterization or a profile of your camera. Now, the nice thing about this is that you don't have to do it every time in every lighting condition. And there's a little bit of disagreement, I think, amongst people who use this. In my personal use, if I have created a profile for a camera lens combination outdoors with even lighting, and the lighting doesn't change that much during the day, I'm not going to go back and reshoot the target. And similarly, if I'm in the studio, I'm using studio lighting for art reproduction, I'm going to take a photograph of the chart, and I'm going to take a photograph of the chart with the painting, and I'm going to create my profile, and as long as I don't have to change out the physical light because one breaks or something like that, I'm not going to reshoot the target either. If, on the other hand, I'm moving from place to place where there's really significant changes in mixed lighting, such as a conference center, just for confidence sake, I might reshoot the target, although I found that it only makes a small difference, if any. So to give you an example, in Lightroom, in the Develop module, you would go over to the User Presets. This gets automatically exported to the Lightroom version that you're using. This happens to be Lightroom 5. And under the User Presets, you're going to be able to see the calibration files that you've created using this device. So very simple, very easy to use. You can apply them in a batch to the files that are in a particular folder or library in Lightroom. You can do the same thing in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to back up just a second here. You can see this is a panel from Adobe Camera Raw. You can go apply preset, and voila, you're off and running. Very straightforward, very simple, highly accurate. These are what's called spectrally neutral pigments, so they give back accurate color information to the camera and to the software regardless of the lighting source that's being used. The other thing is that on the inverse side of it, there are 2 neutral target patches. Now, unlike some other setups like this, there are no tinted patches here for you to click on later to create a toning effect in your images. We felt that it was much better to have a neutral target that would give you a good color balanced result, and then that you could do the customization later on your own. Now, just a second here, I need to turn this off. Okay. You could do the customization on your own. So you have two large gray patches plus two 10% gray ramps. The large gray patches are set to the 50% level. You can use these for all kinds of things. The thing I use it for the most is setting the in-camera balance because it's big. It's a little bit easier to use than the spider cube. It's nice to have this along. It's also a little bit easier to see how it frames up in the camera. I use this a lot to white balance multiple cameras when I'm doing shoots, and the same thing with the profiling. If you have several cameras on a photo shoot and you want to get them all into the same sort of color behavior or the same color, color behavior is good. Get them into the same kind of color behavior and production, you would use the spider checker and create a profile for each one. You have much better result in post-production. The quick in-camera white balance can be ensure that the initial view of images is optimized. So for example, when you're shooting to generate JPEGs or you're shooting to generate previews on the camera, particularly in mixed lighting, it's very useful. And again, it's important to check the lighting intensity and evenness when you're using these so that you get a good result. Now, let's talk a little bit about display calibration. Display calibration has its place in this discussion, although we did talk about calibration for capture workflow. It has its place in part because sometimes you're going to be shooting tethered. And if you're shooting tethered and your display is not calibrated, you're in trouble. Because whatever you're going to see on that screen is not going to be representative of what the information in the image actually is. In other words, you're going to have a skewed result on screen, and so you're going to be thinking the wrong way. You're going to be thinking about, what do I need to do, the camera or the lighting, to make it look better, when it's really the screen that's causing your problems. So a calibrated display about once a month is what you need to be doing, is going to be an enormous help to you in your studio or location work, and I shoot tethered in both places. Now, display calibration is very straightforward. We talked before about a series of color patches. What happens is we load the software onto the computer. The software is going to show a series of color patches to this sensor. There are 7 color sensors in here. Those patches are going to go by one, and eventually you are going to calibrate that display to those color sensor standards. It's going to save the results and apply those to the video card in the computer. Every time you restart the computer, those results will be reapplied to the video card. It's also going to do something else that's very important. Most of the displays come out of the box. They're too bright and too blue. And it's partly the physics of the backlight that's built into the display, but it's also the fact that the manufacturers are testing them in the factory and they're sending them to a showroom floor in a condition where they would stand out. Well, being really bright and really oversaturated and really contrasty and maybe a little too blue makes it stand out on a showroom floor, but it's not the right thing for photography. And hence the need to calibrate and keep it calibrated so that you get good, consistent color results. So it's going to manage the color for you. It's going to manage the highlight and the shadow detail, so you're seeing the detail in the bride's dress and you're seeing the detail in the groom's tux. Those kinds of things are important, and you're editing to the correct endpoint instead of editing to an imaginary endpoint. And again, we're just going to go over this very briefly. You can see these color patches, which I made up just to get this point across, are washed out, not very contrasty, not very attractive. And down below, they've got more life to them. They're more real to life. And one of the tests that you can use for yourself is either put an image on screen that you know, and you know what it's supposed to look like, and see how it does. You can put a gray target on screen and see if there's any kind of color cast. The eye will pick up a color cast in a gray background faster than anything else. Or you can run one of these calibrations and look at the test results, and you'll know right away whether or not you did a good job and things are working out for you. The Spider 4 is the most accurate spider yet by quite a bit. It will calibrate just about any flat screen that's out there, and as you'll find out later on, we're also moving into the video side of things. It will also calibrate both normal gamut and wide gamut displays, laptops, retina displays, a lot of the other new laptops, the iPad, the iPhone, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the first software screens that you'll see during display calibration. Very straightforward set of screens. It's what we call wizard-driven. There are a number of, and Spider 4 Elite, there are a number of advanced settings right down here. I'm not going to get into those right now, but normally what one would do would be to start with a full calibration. In a previous screen, you've already told it what kind of screen you have, which is typically an LED or a laptop. You're going to set the calibration goals to these three specifications. So you've got gamma 22, 6500, and brightness of 120. The gamma 22 is to give you the right appearance of the image on your screen. Gamma is, one way you could describe gamma as an adaptation of the behavior of the screen to what human vision can actually deliver. And so it's something of a contrast curve. It's protecting the details and the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows so that not any particular area gets overdone or underdone. The white point at 6500 gives you a nice neutral white point. Both of these help with screen-to-print match, as does brightness. Brightness is the one area where people have the most trouble. People come to me and say, well, I really hate the color of my prints. And I ask them, well, what do you mean exactly by the color of your prints, the appearance of your prints? Tell me exactly what's going on. They say, first of all, the prints look too dark. Well, that means that the screen is too bright. If the screen's too bright, this is what I was talking about back at the beginning. If the screen is too bright, people tend to edit the image down. They edit it down, curves, levels, exposure controls. They edit it down so it looks okay on the screen. But when they send it to the printer, that image has been altered to a false destination. It comes off the printer looking too dark, or it comes back from the lab looking too dark. And so one of the reasons that the brightness levels are up high, I can't open this, it's not the software, it's a screenshot, but there are higher levels in this, is that the room lighting is too high. If you're seeing recommended brightness levels from your calibration device that are, say, 200, your room lighting is just too bright. You need to cover that bright window or turn down some of the room lighting. In general, what I recommend to people for a good result, and also less fatigue and headaches, is to get the room lighting down to the point where you could just comfortably read a book or magazine. If you can get it down to that level or just a little bit lower and get the brightness on the screen down to about 120, the screen will be the brightest thing in the room. It'll be comfortable to look at. It'll be pretty close in terms of screen-to-print match. And all of those things will work out for you. If the screen is too bright, you're going to be editing your images down and you're going to have issues with your print quality. There's a number of tests that come with the Spider 4 Elite. One of them is this color map that shows you how your calibration worked vis-a-vis a particular color space. Well, this is a wide gamut monitor. It's an HP, and you can see here that I enabled a test against Adobe 98 RGB, which is a very commonly used color space for photography. And that is the purple outline that you see here. This teardrop shape is a 2D view of the gamut of human color vision. Now, the calibration that we did, which is outlined in red, is slightly larger than Adobe 98. So we're getting a good calibration. It's at least 100% of Adobe 98 across the board. And so we have a reasonable confidence that the display is performing as it should, and that we're getting the full gamut of color from Adobe 98 that we should be getting. The same thing would apply to what we call a normal monitor, say a laptop. Most laptops operate in sRGB, which is a smaller color space, and you would run the same test against sRGB. Now, we also have a test for the calibration that's more of a visual test than a quantitative or qualitative test. And this is, what does it look like to you? And one of the things I talk about is natural color. Natural color should look like it does in everyday life. When you're looking at a print or you're looking at the screen, you can certainly see on the lower right here that these are not natural colors. This is the uncalibrated view. This screen lets you switch between calibrated and uncalibrated. Look at the grass. I don't know if the word anemic is really the right one, but certainly undersaturated, not very contrasty, just not right. And the same thing with the blue color of the sky and the red of the church here. These areas are they're just not cutting it as far as color goes in the uncalibrated state. And then you go over here to the calibrated area. The grass really is nice emerald green, really pretty. The sky is blue with a nice gradation from the horizon to the zenith. It's really looking good. And so you can see with this test how your calibration went, how it looks, and they're everyday things. Another way you can tell whether your calibration is effective or not is to look at the black and white examples here. If there is a color cast, typically shows up as magenta or green, you will see this first in an image that is monochromatic. So these black and white images will give you a really good idea of the performance of your display. You know, lately I've been getting questions via our technical support group about age of monitors, and I'm seeing people who are trying to calibrate monitors that are 5, 6, 7 years old. And I want to mention that if you have a display that's older than 3 years old, you really want to start taking a hard look at its performance, because over time, even flat screen displays do wear out, and they become less and less flexible in terms of calibration. And so you'll start to see flaws like a tint in the black and white areas, or you'll start to see certain colors start to shift. So blue skies may shift towards a deep magenta. It may not be able to set the display bright enough or dark enough as the backlight starts to fade. So keep in mind that displays don't last forever, and if you get a bad calibration result on an older display, you may want to question continuing to use that display device. In the Spider 4 Elite, let's say you have monitors working side by side in a workspace, 2 people working side by side, or you have 2 monitors on the same computer, and the video card supports dual displays and dual calibrations. You can see here we have a utility called SpiderTune, and very simply we have the same test photographs, and you can adjust the white point. Basically, these are points on the color wheel. You can adjust the gamma and the brightness, and you can save the results so that the next time you calibrate, if you need to use this, you can simply by loading it back in. So this particular tool is extremely useful. I didn't mention before, but you can also double-click in the center of any of these groups of photos or any single photo and enlarge it so it will go to the full size of the panel. And that can be very, very useful to you as far as making comparisons and making adjustments. Now, I want to talk for a minute about the new Spider HD, which is a new kit that we have. And the reason I want to talk about it is that there's so much interest in the photographic community in videography, video capture, movie making, and that sort of thing. And we've developed this from our technology to enable people to control the camera, and we have the Spider Cube and the Spider Checker there for that, and also to control the display. And you think, well, what's the big deal? It's just a display. Well, we're also thinking about displays in terms of video reference displays, field displays that go on video cameras or on certain DSLRs. What we're trying to do is help people, again, control that capture workflow so they get a good result and they go to post-production in good shape. Pardon me. So it's what we call a new flagship product. It has the Spider 4 Elite HD. The HD designation means that it will calibrate a computer-driven display, and it will also calibrate a video reference display or a television set. It uses the same Spider 4 sensor technology, but the software has been changed. There's what we call a fork in the software. When you start the software, it's going to ask you what kind of display you're using. And if you say television, it will go off and provide tests for a television or a video display. And if you say computer or LED, it will go off and provide a different set of tests and calibration tools. We have the Spider Cube, which again is useful for applying white balance in video or still photography. and of course the spider checker, and I'll talk a little bit more about the role of that device in video in just a moment. Now, as far as video display calibration goes, we've branched out quite a bit. We can certainly calibrate most televisions and a lot of video displays right now. Very, very helpful to people to be able to harmonize their displays. In a lot of places, people are editing video. They have 2 or 3 screens on the desk. They may have 2 computer-driven displays and a television-driven display for comparison. That's one thing. Harmonizing those can be very important. They will have devices out in the field. Okay, and then we also have things like the Samurai Blade from Adamus, and we've been working with Adamus. We have a spider device that can calibrate their field display. This attaches to the camera. So I'm going to jump down here. This Canon camera has a brace that goes over the top, and you can attach the Adamus to the top of the camera. Very, very helpful, much easier to use than the eyepiece, and also very, very accurate color when it's in a calibrated state. There are also image editing software packages that are starting to come online. DaVinci Resolve 11 will use the presets that we described before to color profile your video camera. And so you can take a spider checker, you can shoot the spider checker, create the profile for that, and apply it in the DaVinci software. And so you get the benefits that you're getting in still photography in your video work. And that makes an enormous difference. Okay, keep in mind that most video capture, in spite of all the talk about RAW and the RED cameras, but most video capture is compressed capture. That means it's operating in what's called usually Rec 709, which is a color space very similar to sRGB. Has a little bit of clipping going on the highlights and the shadows. And so in those environments, it's particularly important to get the color and the exposure right in the camera, because you don't have much latitude in post-production for making corrections. Remember the old days of shooting JPEGs with your DSLR, and I think you'll know what I'm talking about. You can also set the video camera white balance, just as you do with a still camera. On the side of this Canon, I think this is a C300, on the side of this Canon camera there is a white balance button. You simply fill the frame with the gray panels on the spider checker. You push the button and you're white balanced for you're balanced for that lighting condition. If the lighting condition changes down the road, let's say you move to a different location, you change the set that you're working with, you change the lighting, et cetera, then I would do that again. And what you'll find is down the road as you go to post-production and you're working in Premiere or you're working in Final Cut Pro 10, that it's going to be much easier to get a good-looking video stream if you white balance the camera before you started shooting. Again, there's that issue of, with a lot of these cameras, the in-camera compression, the codec that's used to create the video stream is definitely lossless, and you are losing some color and dynamic range information. And the more you can help yourself up front, the better off you're going to be. Now that applies across the board. That applies to still cameras, get it right in the camera. It applies to video capture, get it right in the camera. You'll be a much happier camper if you do both of those things. Now, at the beginning of this presentation, I showed you a photograph. I'm going to jump back to the beginning. Over to the right here, we have the lens cowl. Now, so I'm going to talk about this very, very briefly. The lens cowl is used to help set the focal point on cameras that allow lens focal point adjustment. There's a lot of material about this on the website, so please go take a look. We take advantage of the adjustments that are now built into a lot of the advanced DSLRs or video-capable DSLRs, and you can adjust the focal point for any lens that will mount on these cameras, provided that the camera itself supports that. So you can see here, if we shot this and the rear numbers are in focus on the sliding scale, we're back focusing, and the front numbers are in focus, we're front focusing. Very, very interesting tool. It can also be used in some situations when you're setting up you're putting together your video setups, is that you can use the target. I'm going to go back. You can use the target on here to set focus. Say if you're pulling focus, you can use that to set your focal points and mark them off before you start shooting. Now let's just see here. Here's an interesting question. I don't know if David's answered this, but it's worth putting out to the group. Any quirks one should be aware of when calibrating an Apple product, computer, or monitor as compared to a Windows product? I think I would even broaden that question out and say there's quirks with every display. The fact is that even if the displays are coming from the same manufacturer, there are sometimes manufacturing changes made along the way that you'll never know about. You bought XYZ monitor in June and you went back and bought the exact same model the following February. It's no guarantee that they're going to be absolutely positively identical devices. That's one of the reasons SpiderTune is in the Spider Elite software, is that there are some little changes that happen. Sometimes the monitors age a little bit. Sometimes one monitor has an sRGB color space, the other monitor has an Adobe 98 color space. There's a dozen different ways at least that they could be different. I think the important thing to know is that you may never get them to be exactly the same. It's sometimes possible and sometimes not. It's more important to get them almost or approximately correct and to try and harmonize the entire workflow so that what you see on the field monitor, what you see on the display on the computer, what you see on the video reference monitor are harmonized enough that you're not editing to a false destination, that you're editing to a correct destination. That if you hand your work off to someone else, they're working on a display that's matched to yours or close enough to yours that they're not going to ruin your work. So that's the way I would answer that question. Okay, now going on to the webinars, I do want to ask David Tobie if he has any comments or anything else he wants to say before I move on to the remainder of the webinar.
You've been doing such a wonderful job, David. I couldn't imagine anything that I could add.
We have a lot of previously recorded topics. We try to cover photography, videography, different types of photography, color management, printing, really aspects of still and motion capture, the convergence of still and motion capture. A lot of people are focused on that. And these are all recorded and available on our website at spider.datacolor.com. It's not all about color management. We typically, this particular webinar gets presented about once a quarter. And then we try to cover other materials to help people become better photographers. That's our goal. On the 3rd of June coming up, we have a webinar on fundamentals of image editing. We're going to be talking about using layers and layer masks for compositing in Photoshop. That's something I do a lot in my commercial photography. It's a very, very powerful tool. We're going to be starting off more or less at an intermediate level. We're going to be assuming that people understand at least, what a layer is, and then we're going to show them how to take it from there. We're also on the 12th going to be doing some work on time-lapse photography, a subject near and dear to my heart. I've been investing heavily in video and also time-lapse capability, and it's a really interesting thing. When it comes to webinars like this, these two are ones I think you should try to make it to. But in particular, I'm excited about time-lapse because it's such a great bridge to videography. Time-lapse takes all the skills that you have in still photography and allows you to apply them into creating a video product. That's a pretty exciting thing. The only thing you really need to add to that right off the bat, if you don't own a tripod, you'll need a tripod. Most people have one. The other thing you'll need is a timer to control the camera shutter. Very small investment for a big benefit and a lot of fun and a way to see things, I think, in ways that you've never seen them before. So if you can make it to that one, please do. Now I want to say thank you to Hunts and Datacolor for sponsoring this webinar. David and I always enjoy these. It's really a lot of fun to help people meet their goals, and and advance themselves as photographers. We have a winner for the Spider 4 Pro is Denise Peterson. Denise, our marketing manager, will be getting in touch with you via email to get your information and to get the Spider 4 Pro over to you. Discounts, 15% off all Datacolor Spider products purchased at huntsfotoandvideo.com. The discount code is 15 off color. It's valid through 5/31/2014. Again, my name is David Saffir. I am the Chief Cook and Bottle Washer at David Saffir Photography in Southern California. You can see my blog and web information here. I think the most important thing, though, is that I'm willing to answer questions if you have them. You can send me emails at dsaffir@mac.com. It's not always possible for me to answer an email the same day. I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of tech support work. I have articles to write. You know how it is. Running around, customers are chasing me. If I don't answer you on the first day, just ping me the second day. Nobody's going to get their nose out of joint, I hope. I certainly won't. Ping me the second day and say, hey, David, you missed me on the first pass. I really need an answer, and I'll do my best to answer you. David Tobie also has a great blog with some really meaty articles in it, cdtobie.wordpress.com, and his web address is cdtobie.com. I also encourage you to go to spider.datacolor.com. Take a look at the recorded webinars. Certainly, some are better than others, but there's a really wide range of material for you to pick from. They're all free. Stay tuned for our next webinars. I hope you'll join us then. Have a great day.